All right, it's Jeff Zito. Thanks for checking out another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast, consistently in the top 10 on the Apple Podcast Music Interviews chart. I believe number 9 today. Closing in on 200 episodes, which is unbelievable. Thank you once again for listening and supporting. We're streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you wouldn't mind, hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much. And would love a 5-star rating. And if you could, leave a comment and or a review. If you want to go through the entire catalog, check out some of the past guests and episodes, you can easily do so by going to celebrityjobber.com. And you can also follow on Instagram, celebrity_jobber_podcast. And a ton of videos up on youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. What was their life like before they were famous, and what led to the fame, the big break, if you will? I remember when my guest this week first kind of came onto the scene. Never knew him, never heard of him. And then he played the role of the Russian Ivan Drago in the movie Rocky IV. Let me tell you a little something about me, because I'm sure you don't know this. I'm a huge fan of Rocky, all of the movies. When I was younger, it was one of the very first videos that we rented. You know, we got a VCR, and back in the day, there was like a guy in a van that used to deliver movies to you that you would rent for like a week. And I remember my parents getting Rocky. And as a very young kid, I remember just being absolutely fascinated with this story about this regular guy who was a fighter, and he got this unbelievable chance to fight the heavyweight champion. And it's this story of the everyday man and how he got his shot and took advantage of the opportunity and became a household name. Now, the movie Rocky was kind of loosely based on a real guy, a guy from New Jersey, a guy by the name of Chuck Wepner, nicknamed the Bayonne Bleeder. So this guy was like a journeyman fighter and ended up getting a shot at the title to fight Muhammad Ali, and he took it the distance, like all 15 rounds, which was kind of unheard of for a nobody who was fighting the champ at the time, and Sylvester Stallone happened to be in attendance. That's kind of the backstory of Rocky. Anytime I can get somebody on the podcast that was in the movie, I jump at the chance. So he's played the role of He-Man. He's also been in the movie The Expendables. Did he always want to be an actor? Was he an athlete? What did he study in school? How about his parents? What did they do for work? And what about some regular jobs before he was in movies? And how about his first job? Who was he before he played Ivan Drago in Rocky IV? And what was his big break? We're going to find all of that out today. Plus, we'll hear about what his new gig is these days, a show on the History Channel. His name is Dolph Lundgren, and he's my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Hello.
Dolph.
Hi, Jeff.
I must break you. I am a super Rocky fan at a somewhat unhealthy level. I just wanted you to be prepared, okay? And very excited to talk to you today. And I know I only got 10 minutes, but I got a ton of stuff to get to here, so you'll have to bear with me. Rapid fire, right?
Let's do it.
So I'm like trying to figure out what the connection is. History's Greatest Machines with Dolph Lundgren on the History Channel debuts on Monday, June 1st. So I'm like, what's the connection here? Then I dig up that you studied chemical engineering as a major in college. Tell me a little about that.
Yes, my dad's an engineer, electrical engineer. My other older brother's a chemical engineer. My other brother's an engineer. So, yeah, I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps to impress him. So I studied engineering. I got scholarships to America, to MIT, for instance. I wanted to move to America. I couldn't afford it. I mean, I didn't know how to get here. So I figured out the way to do it was to use scholarships, how I got here in the first place, 40 years ago. But then, of course, they came to me. I got into movie business, did about 100 movies or whatever it is. And then I got approached by the series. And another thing I studied in college was history of war. That was a minor. So I've always been interested in history of war and machines because I'm a history buff. So the combination of the engineering and the history was perfect. And that's why I love this opportunity for me to try to make this entertaining and informative for the public, you know?
So, Dolph, when you're in college and you're studying engineering, following in the footsteps of your dad to impress him, what did you think you were going to do for a living? Like, what did you think that studying chemical engineering and being a history buff and having a mind, what did you think your career was going to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. My plan was to go to get my master's, and then go to MIT and do a PhD, and then maybe go to business school, MIT or Harvard. That's what I had in mind.
Wow.
And then I got my master's from the Royal Institute in Stockholm. I did a year in Sydney, Australia, on a scholarship, and I was off to MIT to start my PhD program. That's where I got sidetracked, because to answer the question again, on a very deep, much deeper level, I knew that it wasn't, I knew there was something else out there for me. It wasn't engineering. And I'd done martial arts. So I was like a karate champion. And I had started dabbling in modeling a little bit because some photographer saw me and, oh, you could be a model. So I had, just to make money, and then to get a US visa. But that's how I think I wanted to be successful as an engineer, businessman, but I knew that it wouldn't really make me happy. I realized the creative arts was the way for me to move forward.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
And speaking of the creative arts, I understand that you had aspirations of becoming a rock star at one point. You got into drumming, you got into music. Tell me a little about that.
Yes, I had started drumming when I was about 9 or 10. I had all this excess energy as a kid, and my grandma got me a drum kit, which my dad drove my dad nuts. Of
I
course,
bet.
he'd come home from work and I'd be in there hammering away. So he kind of stopped me. I had to stop doing that, but he sent me to take drumming lessons. So I did that, and then I started playing in a band, in a high school band, both a marching band, and also in a rock band for a while. But then when I got seriously more into academics, and I got to Australia and then to America, I gave it up for a while. I didn't make a movie much later when I played drummer, so I
Right.
got a little kick out of it.
So, I mean, Dolph, this is such a great story. So you get into acting. So your film debut was actually in a James Bond movie, but I would imagine that Ivan Drago was your big break. Can you tell me about that day, how you landed that role, and that phone call maybe that you got from Sly?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a long process. What happened was I went up for the role in New York. I had an agent set me up for a bunch of roles. It was a cattle call, hundreds of guys. I was turned down. There was a woman sitting there, and she said, "How tall are you?" I said 6'5", and she was too tall. Next, and I was like, and I looked behind her. There was a sign saying, handwritten, Rocky, Roman numeral 4, and I was like, oh shit, a Rocky movie. I mean, I love the Rocky movies. I was a fighter, And I listened to Eye of the Tiger when I won my championship, in Australia and all that. So I through my acting coach, I managed to set up a dinner with one of Sly's friends, John Hertzfeld, who's a director, and he said, "You're perfect. You're the guy Sly's looking for." And I gave him some photos, and then he got him to Stallone, and I didn't hear anything for 6 months. I did the Bond movie, and then somebody called me in Sweden, out of breath. "Oh, thank God I found you. I've been looking for months. You didn't have I didn't know how to get hold of you." And finally, they tracked me down somehow. And I was flown to LA, met with Sly. He had long hair and was tanned. He was going to do Rambo 2. I got 5,000 guys up for this role. And then, we posed in boxing trunks, and then I had to start lifting weights to put on some muscle because I was a bit skinny, just big legs like a fighter. And I did that. I practiced a monologue. I did a screen test 6 months later with two other Russian guys, and they did kind of a Russian Mr. T. "I must demolish you. I will kill you." And I kind of played the character like I must break. I played it very internal,
Oh.
right? And that was the next day. Sly called me and said, "You got the role, kid." So then I
Wow.
moved to LA. So there you go.
Life changed forever after
Yeah,
that role,
forever.
right?
Yeah, it was like in the movies.
So it's like you're by the way, Dolph Lundgren, his current gig right now is History's Greatest Machines with Dolph Lundgren on the History Channel. That's what you're doing right now. I want to know what your very first job was.
Oh, my first job, paying job. The one that comes to mind was my dad. This is back in the 70s, or it's probably late 60s. My dad just said, I must have been about 12 or maybe younger, 10. "Okay, enough of you sitting around the house in the summer. You got to get a summer job." And I think I must have been 11 or something, and I got to work in a restaurant. I was working in the kitchen. I was in the either I was it was in a corporate dining hall, and I was either putting up slop on these plates, dishing up food, or I was even worse. I was stuck back in the kitchen where guys were these kind of alcoholics were like cleaning the plates, and the smell, all the garbage was there, and all the food stuff, and I was there for I did like 8 hour days there, and I was just a kid, and
Wow.
that's when I thought I'm gonna study. I
Right.
need an education. I can't look at these. I mean, they were nice people, but just not good.
Sure.
So it was my dad was even though he was rough, I guess it made an impression.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
So you're speaking of your dad, and I understand that you have an autobiography which is coming out in
Yeah.
September. My whole story. So you're not going to hold back. I understand a difficult relationship with your dad. He
Yeah,
demanded a
very
lot
good.
from you.
Very difficult. But like somebody said, we're victims of victims. And I always remember that phrase. So my dad grew up during the Depression, and he was where people starve to death, and he was probably beaten as a kid. And he obviously didn't know how to deal with it, didn't do any therapy. He was just he was a very smart man, but troubled, and he was violent. He was also an officer, an army officer, and he beat me a lot when I was a kid for anything, whether it was something I went wrong at work in his job, or I didn't know why, and really had no explanation. Me and my mom, and didn't touch my siblings. I had three siblings, but what it did was it kind of I think it laid the groundwork for one trying to become expressive and try to find a way to let those feelings out, that all that kind of trauma and pain I had, because you still love your parents even if they beat you, and I think that's how I got into fighting, because a lot of guys who end up in the military or police officers or contact sports, they've had some, not all of them, but many have had problems with their dad, and that's the one way to feel strong and to feel self-confident. And that's why I did sports. And then that's also why I became an actor. So I know Stallone has a similar background with his father. I think Arnold too, by the way, since they're friends of mine. They've both spoken about it. So yeah,
I
that's
think
what I was
those were the
doing as part of the
days.
book.
Things were different back then. I can't wait to read it. My whole story, Dolph Lundgren, the autobiography, comes out in September. And Mondays on the History Channel, History's Greatest Machines with Dolph Lundgren, 10 p.m. Monday nights. Can't wait to see it. Wish I had another 10 minutes with you, Dolph. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, my friend. Thank you.
A difficult relationship growing up with his old man, an abusive relationship, which may have forced him to get into fighting. He was a champion kickboxer. Born in Sweden, talked about his first job in a restaurant with alcoholics, washing dishes, in the kitchen, serving slop. And it was that job at an early age. He said he was like 11 or 12. He said, this can't be my life. That was when he decided to start studying and get serious about his life and career. I think that's pretty huge to have that thought process at 11 or 12 years old. At that age, I was thinking about becoming a professional athlete, or definitely not serious about my education or, getting a good job. So what he did was he used the academics to get to the U.S., to get a scholarship, went to MIT, got his master's, wanted to be an engineer, wanted to impress his father. Wasn't really sure what he was going to do with that degree. He said just, be an engineer, be a businessman, be successful. But he figured it was the arts that he loved, that he was passionate about. He once aspired to be a musician, a rock star. He was a drummer at an early age, and then got into movies and acting and modeling. He was in the James Bond movie A View to a Kill, and then talked about the cattle call for Rocky IV. He said he got an agent, and he went on a bunch of auditions and ultimately landed the role of Ivan Drago in Rocky IV. Talked about that phone call that he got from Sly Stallone. And he said, just like the movies, that role, that changed his life. And his autobiography, which comes out in September, titled Fights Worth Fighting, gets very deep and personal about the abusive relationship that Dolph had with his dad. And his new show, History's Greatest Machines, with Dolph Lundgren, Monday nights, 10 p.m. on the History Channel. Very interesting. Dolph Lundgren, Ivan Drago. I must break you. So you can check out past guests and episodes once again by going to celebrityjobber.com. Follow on Instagram, which was celebrity_jobber_podcast. And also a bunch of videos up on youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. Streaming everywhere. So please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating. And if you could please leave a comment and or a review. You can also subscribe to the Substack feed, substack.com/celebrityjobber. A lot of bonus content. Dolph Lundgren, very smart guy, and used his smarts to get a scholarship to come to the United States. He thought the opportunity was bigger here and originally intended on being an engineer and being a businessman into the workforce, but he didn't love it. And what he did love were the performing arts. Great story. Can't wait to read his autobiography. Thank you for listening once again to the Celebrity Jobber podcast. We'll see you next week. I'm Jeff Zito.